that we have control over the event, but we also want to make sure that people get to exercise their First Amendment right.
The migrant crisis, this international global crisis, really requires a federal resource response.
When we have over 68,000 homeless legal citizens living in our streets
that have entered the U.S. are now moving north into larger cities, and some of those cities are struggling to manage the influx.
Whose first act upon entering into this nation was to break the law.
Black Chicagoans' discontent. Let's dive into why there's so much buzz about the Democratic National Convention setting up shop in Chicago. There's this palpable discontent swirling among Black Chicagoans about the whole thing. First off, a bunch of folks standing up and saying, "No way, DNC, not in our backyard." Yep, that's the vibe. There's this vocal opposition brewing, and it's not just a whisper. Black Chicagoans are speaking up loud and clear, making it known that they're not thrilled about the DNC rolling into town. Now, why all the fuss? Well, it boils down to this feeling that the DNC is swooping in and swooning over national politics while neglecting the nitty-gritty stuff happening right here in Chicago. It's like we've got our own set of problems, thank you very much, and they need some serious attention. But instead, it feels like the DNC is all about the big picture, leaving locals feeling overlooked and sidelined. Folks are seriously worried about what might go down when the DNC throws its party. We're talking potential disruption, protests, and maybe even a bit of chaos.
Chicago has been chosen to host the 2024 Democratic National Convention.
On behalf of our city, I am immensely proud and thrilled to welcome this event back to our city.
The location of the 2024 Democratic National Convention has been decided.
Pat and Dina, the Democratic National Convention now 7 months away. And
it's not just about waving signs and chanting slogans. It's about the possibility of things getting heated and messy on the streets of Chicago. Tensions are already simmering, and adding the DNC into the mix is like tossing a match into a gasoline-soaked bonfire. Black Chicagoans are concerned about their city becoming a battleground, with all eyes on them during the convention. It's not exactly the kind of attention they're looking for. So that's the deal with the whole discontent surrounding the DNC's presence in Chicago. It's a mix of feeling neglected, frustrated, and downright worried about what might unfold when the big event rolls around. Will the DNC listen to these concerns and address them head-on? Only time will tell, but for now, Black Chicagoans are making sure their voices are heard loud and clear. Mayor Johnson's security measures. Let's talk about Mayor Johnson's plan to keep the peace during the DNC in Chicago. The guy's got a serious job on his hands, and he's not taking it lightly. First things first, Mayor Johnson dropped the shocker. He's ramping up security for the DNC. More cops, more barricades, and more checkpoints. The whole thing. It's like Fort Knox, but for a political shindig instead of gold bars. Now, you might be wondering, why all the fuss? Well, it's simple. When you've got a bunch of high-profile politicians, delegates, and media types descending on your city, you gotta make sure everything's buttoned up tight. Mayor Johnson's not just focused on keeping the peace during the DNC, he's also thinking about the aftermath.
6 months from the Democratic National Convention taking over parts of the city, and now we're learning more on the security that'll be in place.
No stranger to hosting large-scale events. This will be our 26th political convention, our 12th DNC.
That we have control over the event, but we also want to make sure that people get to exercise their First Amendment right.
We are very confident in our ability to execute a very safe, successful, and enjoyable convention.
Once the convention wraps up and everyone heads home, he wants Chicago to come out looking like $1 million, not a war-torn battlefield. So that's the deal with Mayor Johnson's security measures for the DNC. It's all about making sure Chicago shines bright during one of the biggest political events of the year. Will his plan work? Only time will tell, but for now, Mayor Johnson's got one message for the world: bring it on, DNC, Chicago's ready for anything. Chicago's Democratic legacy. Let's take a trip down memory lane and talk about Chicago's Democratic legacy. This city's got politics running through its veins like deep dish pizza sauce. First off, you can't talk about Chicago without mentioning the Democrats. They've been running the show here for what feels like forever. It's like they've got a monopoly on City Hall, and they're not planning on giving it up anytime soon. Now let's talk mayors. We've had a string of Democratic mayors holding court in this town, and they've practically built themselves a throne at City Hall. From Richard J. Daley to Rahm Emanuel, these guys have had a lock on power for decades. It's like a political dynasty, Chicago style. So that's the deal with Chicago's Democratic legacy. It's a tale as old as time, a city ruled by Democrats for better or for worse. Love 'em or hate 'em, you can't deny their influence on the Windy City's political landscape. And who knows, maybe one day the winds of change will blow through and shake things up. But until then, it's business as usual in the land of deep dish and dirty politics. Black communities, fractured loyalty. Let's talk real talk about the fractured loyalty within Chicago's black community when it comes to the Democrats. It's like there's a crack in the foundation, and folks are starting to see through the facade. First off, there's this growing skepticism bubbling up among black Chicagoans when it comes to Democratic politicians. It's like they're tired of the same old song and dance. They've heard the promises before: better schools, safer streets, more opportunities, but they're not seeing much change on the ground. And let's talk broken promises. Black Chicagoans have had it up to here with politicians who talk a big game but don't deliver the goods. It's like they're getting left in the dust, while everyone else gets to feast at the table of prosperity. From crumbling infrastructure to skyrocketing crime rates, it's like the Democrats have forgotten who got them into office in the first place. But folks are starting to reevaluate their loyalty to the Democratic Party. It's like they're saying, hey, maybe it's time to shake things up a bit. They're tired of being taken for granted, tired of being treated like second-class citizens in their own city. They want change, and they're not afraid to look outside the usual political playbook to find it. So that's the deal with the fractured loyalty within Chicago's black community. It's a tale of skepticism, frustration, and a growing sense of empowerment. Will the Democrats listen to their concerns and course correct? Only time will tell, but for now, black Chicagoans are ready to chart their own path forward, with or without the Democratic Party by their side.
That can build a better, stronger, safer Chicago. That has been the tactic over decades, and that's been a failed strategy.
When we have over 68,000 homeless legal citizens living in our streets.
As black people who have been hurt continuously by the city and country it loves.
Holders obviously coming together today. Chicago city leaders say they'll move with urgency while implementing this community safety strategy.
Economic toll of the influx. We're about to dive into the economic roller coaster that is the migrant influx hitting Chicago. It's like a storm rolling in. You can see it coming from miles away, and you better believe it's going to shake things up. First things first, let's talk about the impact on Chicago's economy. When you've got thousands of migrants pouring into the city, you better believe it's going to have some ripple effects. Sure, there's the initial surge in demand for housing, food, and other essentials, but there's also a whole lot of strain being put on the city's resources. Now let's talk numbers. We're talking big bucks here. We're talking millions of dollars being shelled out by the city to set up migrant shelters, provide services, and handle all the other logistical headaches that come with an influx of newcomers. And you better believe that money's got to come from somewhere, and that somewhere is usually the taxpayers' pockets. But it's not just about the dollars and cents. It's also about the tensions simmering beneath the surface. When you've got migrants moving into a city already grappling with its own set of challenges, you're bound to see some friction. From competition for jobs to cultural clashes, integrating migrant communities into the fabric of Chicago isn't exactly smooth sailing. And let's not forget about the folks who were here before the migrants showed up, the ones who've been calling Chicago home for generations. They're feeling the squeeze too. It's like they're being pushed aside to make room for the newcomers, and they're not exactly thrilled about it. But here's the thing, it's not all doom and gloom. Sure, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. With the right investments and the right policies in place, Chicago could emerge stronger and more vibrant than ever before. It's all about finding common ground, building bridges, and working together to create a city that works for everyone. So yeah, that's the deal with the economic toll of the migrant influx hitting Chicago. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but one thing's for sure, it's not going away anytime soon. Whether Chicago emerges from this storm battered and bruised or stronger than ever remains to be seen. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be one heck of a ride.
The migrant crisis, this international global crisis, really requires a federal resource response.
We will never close our doors to those who come here in search of a better life.
When you think about the $100 million you're talking about in terms of violence prevention and violence interruption,
We don't want to have to recall anybody. We don't want to have to protest anybody, but we are not going to be ignored, Brandon.
Mayor Johnson's resource allocation. All right, let's shine a spotlight on Mayor Johnson's resource allocation and see what's really going down in the Windy City. First off, Black Chicagoans aren't pulling any punches when it comes to scrutinizing how Mayor Johnson's divvying up the city's resources. It's like they're saying, hey, where's our piece of the pie? They're watching closely and asking tough questions about why certain neighborhoods seem to be getting the short end of the stick while others are rolling in dough. And let's talk about those issues. Homelessness and crime. They're like two sides of the same coin, right? You've got folks living on the streets, struggling to get by, while crime rates shoot through the roof. And Black Chicagoans aren't mincing words when it comes to holding Mayor Johnson accountable for how he's handling these crises. They're saying, hey, Major Johnson, what's the deal? You promised us safer streets, better services, and a city that works for everyone. But instead, we're seeing more of the same. More violence, more poverty, more despair. It's like they're fed up with the status quo and demanding real change. But here's the kicker. It's not just about pointing fingers and laying blame. Black Chicagoans are also demanding transparency and fairness when it comes to how resources are allocated. They're saying, we want to see where our tax dollars are going, and we want to make sure everyone's getting their fair share. And you know what? They got a point. When you've got neighborhoods struggling to keep their heads above water while others are swimming in resources, something's got to give. It's time for Mayor Johnson to step up, show some leadership, and make sure everyone's getting a fair shake. That's the deal with Mayor Johnson's resource allocation critique. It's a call to action, a demand for accountability, and a reminder that when it comes to running a city, every dollar counts. Will Mayor Johnson listen to the voices of Black Chicagoans and course correct? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, they're not backing down until they see some real change. Democratic Party's migrant prioritization. Let's unpack the Democratic Party's apparent shift in priorities and how it's rubbing some Black Chicagoans the wrong way. First off, there's this growing chorus of criticism aimed at the Democrats for seemingly putting migrant issues front and center while local concerns take a back seat. It's like they're saying, hey, we've got our own problems right here in Chicago, from crime to unemployment to failing schools, and yet all we hear about is what's happening at the border. And let's talk about perception, because it's a big part of the problem. From the outside looking in, it sure seems like migrants are getting the red carpet treatment while long-standing residents are left out in the cold. It's like they're getting all the attention, all the resources, all the support, while Black Chicagoans are left wondering where their slice of the pie went.
We live in a city overrun by crime, gang violence, poverty, and despair.
But there's much more at stake for the mayor with the question about will the city commit to paying for care?
That have entered the U.S. are now moving north into larger cities, and some of those cities are struggling to manage the influx.
Our local and federal governments have decided to prioritize needs of people.
But here's the thing, it's not just about feeling left out. It's about demanding that the Democratic Party live up to its promises and address the needs of all its constituents, including Black Chicagoans. It's about saying, hey, we've been here for generations, we've paid our dues, and we deserve a seat at the table too. And you know what? They're right. When you've got neighborhoods struggling to survive, families living in poverty, and schools falling apart at the seams, it's time to put the focus back where it belongs, on the people who call Chicago home. So that's the deal with the Democratic Party's prioritization of migrant issues over local concerns. It's a tale of frustration, disillusionment, and a demand for real change. Will the Democrats listen to the voices of Black Chicagoans and course correct? Only time will tell, but one thing's for sure. They're not backing down until they see some real action. Neglected South and West communities. Let's shine a light on the South and West Side communities in Chicago that have been feeling the pinch of neglect for far too long. First things first, let's talk about the elephant in the room, disparities in resource allocation. It's like there's this invisible line dividing the city, with one side getting all the goodies and the other left scrambling for scraps. From parks to schools to infrastructure, it's clear that some neighborhoods are getting the short end of the stick. But here's where it gets real. We're talking about neglect and underinvestment in predominantly black neighborhoods. It's like these communities have been stuck in a time warp with little to show for decades of struggle and resilience. From crumbling streets to shuttered businesses to schools falling apart at the seams, it's a tale of neglect that's hard to ignore. And let's not forget about the people, the families, the children, the elders who call these neighborhoods home. They're the ones who have been left behind, forgotten by city leaders who seem more interested in shiny new developments than the well-being of their own constituents. But here's the thing, it's not all doom and gloom. There's a glimmer of hope on the horizon, a call to action from the South and West Side communities themselves. They're saying enough is enough, we deserve better and we're not afraid to demand it. They're calling for equitable development, investment, and opportunity, not just for some, but for all. And you know what? They're right. It's time for Chicago to reckon with its past and chart a new course forward. It's time to invest in the people and places that have been overlooked for far too long. It's time for South and West Side communities to finally get the resources and respect they deserve. That's the deal with the neglected South and West Side communities in Chicago. It's a story of resilience, resistance, and a demand for justice. Will the city listen? Will it finally step up and do right by its own people? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure. The voices of the South and West Side won't be silenced until their neighborhoods are thriving and their residents are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Demands for political accountability. Let's talk about the demands for political accountability, coming straight from the heart of Black Chicago. First off, there's this resounding call echoing through the streets for accountability from elected officials. It's like folks are saying, "You work for us, remember?" They're tired of politicians who make promises during election season only to disappear into the shadows once they're in office. They want to see results, and they want them now. But it's not just about holding politicians' feet to the fire. It's also about fair representation and responsiveness in city governance. Black Chicagoans are saying, "We deserve a seat at the table and we're not taking no for an answer." They want to see leaders who look like them, who understand their struggles, and who are willing to fight for their interests. And let's not forget about the emphasis on holding politicians accountable for addressing community needs. From tackling crime to improving schools to creating jobs, there's no shortage of issues that need attention. Black Chicagoans are saying, "We've been waiting long enough. It's time for action, not just words."
Mayor Johnson says the city has a multi-pronged plan to increase investments in communities most plagued by crime.
I think we should all be concerned anytime we're having to utilize this level of resources on a temporary situation.
Violence is most pervasive, where disinvestment has been historically implemented.
Of the residents of Chicago without showing them that they're getting something out of this.
But here's the thing, they're not just sitting back and waiting for change to happen. They're mobilizing, organizing, and making their voices heard. From protests to town hall meetings to voter registration drives, they're taking matters into their own hands and demanding a seat at the table. So yeah, that's the deal with the demands for political accountability in Black Chicago. It's a call to action, a demand for representation, and a reminder that democracy only works when everyone has a voice. Will politicians listen? Will they finally step up and do right by their constituents? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, Black Chicagoans aren't backing down until they see real change in their city. Escalating tensions and unrest. In the heart of Chicago, tensions are rising and frustrations are reaching a boiling point among Black Chicagoans. It's a tale of neglect, broken promises, and a sense of injustice that's been simmering for far too long. As the city stands on the precipice of potential unrest, it's crucial to understand the factors driving this escalation and the risks it poses to Chicago's stability, especially with the DNC looming on the horizon. First and foremost, there's a palpable warning sign flashing bright. Tensions are escalating, and the black community's patience is wearing thin. Decades of neglect and underinvestment in predominantly black neighborhoods have left scars that run deep. From crumbling infrastructure to failing schools to rampant unemployment, the disparities are stark and impossible to ignore. Black Chicagoans are tired of being overlooked, tired of being treated as second-class citizens in their own city. They're demanding accountability from elected officials who have long promised change but failed to deliver. And then there's the elephant in the room, the DNC on the horizon. With tensions already running high, the city's stability during the DNC is hanging by a thread. The prospect of thousands of protesters descending on Chicago streets, alongside heightened security measures, only adds fuel to the fire. There's a sense of unease in the air, a fear that the city could erupt into chaos at any moment. But amidst the uncertainty, there's also a glimmer of hope, a call to action from the black community itself. They're mobilizing, organizing, and making their voices heard louder than ever before.
It ain't our responsibility to take care of everybody else.
Whose first act upon entering into this nation was to break the law.
Particular dynamic has created an incredible amount of strain on the city.
From grassroots movements to community forums to voter registration drives, they're demanding a seat at the table and the change they've been promised for so long. It's clear that the status quo isn't working, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Chicago stands at a crossroads with the potential for progress or peril hanging in the balance. Will the city heed the warning signs and take concrete steps to address the root causes of these tensions? Will elected officials finally listen to the voices of black Chicagoans and act before it's too late? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure. The fate of Chicago rests on its ability to confront its past, reckon with its present, and chart a new course forward. The road ahead may be uncertain, but one thing's certain. The time for action is now, before the city finds itself consumed by the flames of unrest. Crime surge in Illinois. In Oak Brook, Illinois, a Chicago suburb, a concerning pattern of crimes perpetrated by migrants has emerged, causing distress and prompting law enforcement action. From October 23 to January 17, a total of 47 migrants were arrested, primarily for property crimes, according to Brian Straukas, the chief of police for the Oak Brook Police Department. The offenses mainly involved retail theft and burglary, illustrating a troubling trend that has local authorities on high alert. One recent incident exemplifies the severity of the issue. An Ecuadorian migrant residing in Chicago stands accused of pilfering over $3,000 worth of merchandise from retail establishments and circumventing immigration and customs enforcement supervision by tampering with his electronic monitoring device. This brazen act underscores the challenges faced by law enforcement in curbing migrant-related crime and ensuring public safety. In another case, Jamie Ubaldo Obando Andrade, 32, was apprehended after allegedly stealing a jacket valued at $395 from a Macy's store in Oak Brook. Subsequent investigations led to the discovery of approximately $3,000 worth of suspected stolen goods in Obando Andrade's possession, along with rolls of tinfoil and a counterfeit driver's license. Such incidents underscore the broader issue of organized retail crime involving migrant offenders, prompting collaborative efforts between local and federal authorities to address these complex challenges. Acknowledging the diligent work of law enforcement in apprehending offenders like Obando Andrade, Robert Berlin, the DuPage County State's attorney, emphasized the serious consequences of retail theft, stating that it is not a victimless crime and has far-reaching implications for the community. By prosecuting offenders to the fullest extent of the law, authorities aim to deter future criminal activity and safeguard businesses and residents from harm. Unfortunately, Obando Andrade's case is not an isolated incident. Several other migrants have been implicated in similar crimes in Oak Brook, raising concerns about the broader implications of migrant-related offenses on local communities. Despite efforts to address the issue, challenges persist, necessitating ongoing collaboration between law enforcement agencies and community stakeholders to mitigate the impact of such crimes. Furthermore, the influx of migrants into sanctuary cities like Chicago has intensified scrutiny and debate over immigration policies and their implications for public safety and community well-being. As cities grapple with the influx of migrants and the associated challenges, it is imperative to strike a balance between compassion and accountability, ensuring that all residents, both newcomers and longtime inhabitants, are afforded equal protection under the law. That's all for this video, folks. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.